So while the rest of us have been distracted by Omicron, a word that's going to be the punchline of incredibly bitter jokes 5 years from now, Omicron, as that has been taking up all of our disk space, the country has inexorably been moving closer to what could be an incredibly destructive war with Russia. Our media is encouraging that war. On MSNBC, the lunatics are demanding to know why Joe Biden isn't doing more to defend the territorial integrity of Ukraine.
We've got to be aggressive in our defense of our allies. And Ukraine, despite what you hear from Putin propagandists across the world, and yes, even here in America, despite what you hear, we have to defend our democratic allies, to start speaking more clearly and more aggressively and telling us how they're going to stop this invasion from happening.
People that stupid should not have TV shows, and they certainly shouldn't be weighing in on adult topics like war and peace, but they are. So you have to ask yourself, why is this happening? Why are the Russians so upset? Why are we moving towards some kind of conflict? Well, there's one reason. Over a number of different administrations, the United States government has pushed Ukraine to join NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Imagine if Mexico fell under the direct military control of China. We would see that as a threat, of course. There'd be no reason for that. Well, that's how Russia views NATO control of Ukraine, and why wouldn't they? We don't get anything out of pushing Ukraine into NATO, so why are we doing this? Clint Ehrlich is a Russia policy researcher. He understands this issue quite well, and we're happy to have him join us this evening. Clint, thanks so much for coming on. So is it too simplistic to say the core dispute here is over Ukraine joining NATO?
Perspective, but here we have people who are arguing that even if the Russians don't invade Ukraine, that we need to invade and kick the Russians out of Crimea. That was an op-ed from a senior Obama administration official this week. And so I would say that it's even simpler than that. We're dealing with our warmongers, unserious people whose policy prescriptions could have deadly serious consequences.
Well, they're deeply unserious people, and they're also people with a long and publicly available track record of failure of conflicts that have diminished the United States materially over the last 20 years. So why do they get a say in this? They're failures.
They like to portray themselves as Cold Warriors, but the architect of America's strategy during the Cold War, George Kennan, warned that NATO expansion could lead us towards war with Russia. And he's been vindicated. We're now on the precipice of that kind of conflict. And so it's a great question. Why is it that we should listen to these people?
Well, I couldn't agree more. I mean, if Max Boot is still making your foreign policy, it's kind of your fault, I would say. But, and this is a sincere question, is there something I'm missing? Is there some compelling American interest that would be served by having Ukraine in NATO?
No, the deeper irony is that NATO doesn't even more of a liability than it would be a military asset. And the people who are pushing this simply argue that it needs to happen because Russia shouldn't have a veto over who's in NATO. In other words, even when it's in our mutual interest to not have a state in NATO, we have to insist that they'll be added just to spite the Russians.
Look, I want to take people seriously, all people, even people I disagree with, maybe especially people I disagree with, but this seems nuts. Is that your assessment?
Tucker, it's not just nuts, it's dangerous. I mean, we're sleepwalking towards conflict with a country that has more than 4,000 nuclear weapons. The Russians are talking about potentially deploying strategic forces to Cuba and Venezuela in a repeat of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And so it's just shocking that people are not more upset about this because the lives of Americans are being threatened over a situation where we have no vital strategic national interest.
So since 1945, we've really only fought wars against poor, disorganized third world countries, North Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria. Do you think that that's convinced a lot of our policymakers that it's like easy to fight wars?
Have war inside our country. The Russians have. They understand the reality of war and what it's like to lose millions of people in a conflict. And somehow our policymakers just imagine that war can never reach us. And the reality is that you and I are in danger from this conflict, Tucker. The people that we love are in danger. And it's just incredibly disturbing that this is happening.
It really is. Clint Ehrlich, I really appreciate your perspective tonight and your clarity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tucker.